Hey, welcome everybody. This is the ESOP Guy, and if you are listening to this podcast, then you are on a journey to an ESOP. So happy that you guys could join us today. If it's your very first podcast or first episode that you're listening, I wanted to say welcome to our podcast. We have developed this as a resource to really help people when they start thinking about employee stock ownership plans, about how they work and how they might work for your business. And so with all of that, this is our third season of podcasting, and we've got a website dedicated to really kind of focusing in on this topic. So you can go to our website at journeytoanesop.com and find out more about other topics that really might interest you if you're thinking about an employee stock ownership plan. So as we go into this episode today, I'm super excited because it's a topic that I do think is very important, because it's much bigger than just the ESOPs. So we're going to talk a lot about the economy, about wealth inequality, and to do that, we're going to get to explore a recently written book called Ownership: Reinventing Companies, Capitalism, and Who Owns What by Corey Rosen. And we're going to go into really just kind of the overview of the book, but really tie down and connect the concept behind how ESOPs really are a great solution for a lot of things. A lot of times we get really discussing the issues related to the selling shareholders, but this is the other side. This is the side for how it really benefits employees, and then bigger than that, though, how it benefits the communities that we live in, how it benefits our society, how it benefits the economy in general, and just kind of where we're going with the economy as well. So I'm excited to do that, and to really explore this book really well. We're going to end up getting to interview today the author of this book, Corey Rosen. So with all of that, Corey, I wanted to kind of just welcome you to the podcast, and let you kind of just speak for a few minutes, just kind of introduce yourself in terms of how you got into ESOPs and kind of the catalyst that drew you to this type of work that you're doing today.
Well, first, Phil, thanks very much for having me, and thanks to all of the people who are watching. So my name's Corey Rosen, and I'm the founder of the National Center for Employee Ownership. Hopefully you all know who we are, but if you don't, just go to National Center for Employee Ownership on the web and you will see who we are. If you're not a member, well, that's an easy sin to fix. You can go to our website and take care of that there too. So we are the main source of information about employee ownership. We have over 50 book titles. We do weekly webinars and community conversations. We do a conference. We do our fall forum that's coming up in a few weeks. So we have lots and lots of really great resources. And by the way, if you're a member, my favorite one is our document library, which is greatly expanded, which has a lot of critical things to make your ESOP run more smoothly. I came to this idea a long time ago. In 1978, I was a Senate staffer, and I read this testimony in the Congressional Record by a very famous sociologist named William White, and actually knew who he was even more because he was at Cornell and I'd done my graduate work at Cornell. And he gave this testimony about this idea of employee ownership, which I'd never heard of before. And I thought, that's really interesting. Here's this idea he was saying where the employees could own the companies that they worked for, and those companies probably would be more productive. The employees would end up with more eventual retirement assets. Communities would do better. And then there was this interesting thing called an ESOP that was something that allowed the owners of the companies who would share ownership with employees to do better too. It almost seemed unreal that everybody wins. You know, there aren't that many things in life where everybody wins. But the more I looked into it, the more I thought that that really is the case. I was always, you know, I was in my 20s, and so I was always looking for a cause to fight. And when I read about this, I thought, this is really a great practical idea. It works, and it has political support from both sides. And that was unusual even then. And so I thought, to change the world and make it a better place, altruism is a great thing, and we should all try to strive for that. But altruism is a lousy vehicle for large-scale social change. If you can link people's self-interest to something good for everybody, you've really got a winner. So I was hooked. I continued to work on it. I got involved in legislation. The most important of the things I got involved in was I drafted what is now Section 1042, convinced my bosses to introduce that, and continued to nag people about it for the ensuing 4 years until it was passed in 1984. And I also started the center because I thought this is a great idea, but very few people know about it. We don't know whether it works that well. We don't have good research on this. We don't have a way for people to find resources, all of that sort of thing. And so I'll start an organization to do that. And here we are. We've grown. We're now about 19 employees.
19 employees. And Garrett, I kind of failed to talk about that in your intro just because I wanted to focus on the book, but starting this NCEO, for those that don't know about the NCEO, it is a very vibrant organization, and they do so much good in the ESOP community because they're bringing people together constantly to educate. And this is what this podcast is all about. And this is what Corey's book is all about, is providing a resource. Did you ever think that the NCEO would be this big when you started it? That's a pretty major accomplishment in life when you think about it.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
Yeah.
The first 3 years, I didn't even get paid. So I was wondering if we get started at all.
Yeah.
I had a side gig to put food on the table. And one of our board members who owned an ESOP company said, "Don't worry, Corey, the first 20 years are the hardest." So I was just hoping that we could be a large enough organization to be self-sustaining, which was our goal, and which we are, and to provide good jobs for a handful of people promoting this. So I never envisioned we get this big, but it's been a great journey.
Yeah. And then the 1042 thing, I just think it's awesome to be able to actually talk to you, because that's everybody's using this, and on the C corporation capital gains tax deferral. So to have the vision to draft that and get it, and then be so instrumental in getting it approved. You've done a lot for ESOPs. Bottom line. So obviously it's your passion, and you dedicated your life to it, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. So this, what was the, in terms of, I know when you write a book, you probably are like, look, I need to say something that hasn't really been said before, or I need to re-say something that needs to be said. What was your inspiration to write the book?
So the book's actually co-authored by me and John Case. John is a best-selling business author that I've known since the early 1980s. He wrote a book called Open Book Management, amongst other books. And John is a terrific guy and a friend and a wonderful writer. And he sent me an email and he said, I think I've got one more book left in me, and I'd love to expand the way we talk about employee ownership to show it's not just a useful thing for company owners who are looking to move on, or it's not just an intervention that'll help in this part of the economy or that part of the economy. It really is something that should be and can be central to making capitalism work, and indeed saving capitalism from its own problems that we're seeing increasingly, not just in the US, but around the world. And that, to be even a little more grandiose, that really threaten democracy. We started off with a somewhat more modest view, but as we started working with our publisher, Barrett Kohler, which itself is employee-owned and was a publisher unlike any publisher we've had, in that they spent a lot of time with us talking about, let's see where we can go with this idea. Let's see how broad we can make the arguments here. And it really helped us to think beyond the initial conceptualization of the book. So it was always a partnership between me and John, and eventually Barrett Kohler as well.
Yeah, and then I think good things are partnerships. And I forgot to mention John too, so I apologize for that at the very front end. Again, super excited, so I'm just jumping right into some things. So, but thanks for, explaining that. As we start off, I think the biggest thing is, we all live in different places in the U.S. And I think and not just geographically, in some cases, we live in different places as far as, economically. And sometimes we just don't understand, like people in the news is difficult too, because you have so much political bias with the news. How would you explain for the kind of common person to say, hey, our layman's terms, like what does it mean to have a wealth gap, as far as wealth inequality goes? And then like, how do we know that we have one and it's growing, a growing social issue that we have in the country?
Right. So for some people, the wealth inequality we have, and really every industrialized country has, is just the inevitable consequence of capitalism. It's a trade-off that you kind of have to make, that if you're going to have a highly productive, efficient economy, you're going to have a lot of inequality. And I think there's some real substance to that argument. But the thing that doesn't have real substance is that there's nothing you can do about it and still have an efficient economy. And employee ownership says, yeah, there is. That if you divide up ownership amongst more people, the pie actually gets a lot bigger for everybody. It was the real genius of ESOPs. They're not about taking money away from anybody. And they're not about, taxing the rich to redistribute to somebody else. In fact, they're giving people who are well off tax incentives. So it's something that is in people's self-interest to do. The consequences, though, of this wealth gap are significant. The first is that about half the population says that it can't put its hands on $1,000 in an emergency. 50% of the private sector workforce is in no retirement plan at all, which means the median retirement assets of an American worker for a private company is zero.
Wow.
This causes this tremendous wealth insecurity, reverberates in all sorts of ways. It means people have a harder time sending their kids to college, paying for medical bills unexpectedly that come up, having a secure retirement, buying a home. And I think on top of that, just having that tremendous insecurity is something that really erodes you psychologically and physically. And the last thing that does is it creates a pervasive sense of unfairness. The feeling that this system is rigged against me. And people have different solutions and look for different white knights to solve their problem. But that feeling of unfairness has historically been one of the key underpinnings of the movement from democracy to autocracy. And we're certainly seeing this happening in a lot of countries around the world. So there's a lot of problems that this creates. And you have one group of people saying, well, the answer to that is fewer taxes and less regulation. And another group of people saying the answer to that is higher taxes and more redistribution into various social programs. Now, I have my own preferences around those things, but that doesn't matter for this purpose, because what we argue in the book is whatever you think about those two things, neither one's going very far politically, because there is such entrenched opposition to whatever you're proposing. Whereas employee ownership is an idea, A, that works, and B, that is politically practical. And that rather than saying it's you guys versus you guys, it's let's all do this together.
Yep. Yeah. So it's like some of the things you said are really good, and I think people don't, like I said, they don't realize it as much on a larger scale. But what we're talking about is there is a political problem in this country where you don't have to be, a rocket scientist to understand. Like we're so polarized in certain ways, nothing's going to get done. And it is coming back to the idea of what's the sustainability of the United States itself, and what we've done as a country that hasn't been done before, and so I think it's kind of a wonderful connection between like how does this really help the country in such a way where politics is failing the country, even though this is a political invention, politics itself are failing. So I love that because it's a big picture, and then it's not only just a big picture, it's something that we focus on with one company at a time, for an ESOP.
And I would add, well, why is this issue more relevant now than it was 20 years ago or 40 years ago? And the answer is that if you go back to, say, the 1970s, half the workforce was in manufacturing, half the non-governmental workforce anyway. People could make a secure living, often with just one wage earner, with relative medium level skilled jobs. That was a realistic aspiration. And what Louis Kelso, the inventor of ESOPs, argued going back to the 50s is that as we went forward over the next generation or two, that wages are going to stagnate and returns to capital were going to soar, because the work that people do would, at least the skilled work that people do, would increasingly be replaced by machinery. He didn't envision in the 1950s how it would be replaced by technology or the globalization that would push wages down even further. So wages ended up stagnating. The median wage in real dollars today is slightly below what it was in 1973. At the same time, people's real costs have increased. Healthcare has grown faster than the cost of inflation. College education certainly has grown faster than that. So a lot of the, we didn't have cable television and cell phones to pay for then. So these are all added expenses, and yet we're making the same amount of money and trying to provide for a retirement at the same time. And it's just not working for a lot of people. But what happened to the people who owned capital? Well, they did quite well. Mm-hmm. And in real dollars, ownership value grew at 8% per year since the 1970s. Remember, the Dow had 3 digits then. Mm. So you now have an economy where 32% of the wealth, productive wealth, is held by less than 1% of the population, and 3 families own more wealth than 90% of the rest of the families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a big gap, obviously, and then, like you said, the trends are there, and inflation now it's worse too, because inflation is so much higher.
That's right.
Trying to just keep pace even over the last 12 months and has been just a very difficult thing to comprehend as far as where do we go next. So kind of that's the wealth inequality issue as we kind of summarize it. So as you start your book, one of the things that you ask is like, what's wrong with what we have? And then you go into this idea of who owns these companies. Talk a little bit about that idea of why is this such a critical question to ask, like who owns the businesses? Because it's obviously we're connecting that concept with the social issue of wealth inequality.
Right. So in this country, we've focused, when we think about economic inequality, we focused on income and not on wealth. And we argue we certainly need to focus on wealth. And so let's look at how wealth is owned right now. And there's 3 primary ways that productive assets are owned. So we're talking about companies. So there's public companies, there's companies owned by private equity, and there's individually owned or family owned businesses. Public companies, we used to think, well, that's ownership. It's a very peculiar kind of ownership, isn't it? For most of us, ownership of stock in public companies is equivalent to betting on a horse at a racetrack. We're not really investing in the horse. We win if the horse wins, but we're going to move that money out of there as soon as possible if we think there's a better investment. We're not providing the company capital to grow. And then there's pension funds and mutual funds and other institutional owners. And these owners, most of their trades are done algorithmically, which means that the stock is typically held for a fraction of a second. That's a very peculiar kind of ownership, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
So the notion that Wall Street is owned by people is really misguided. Wall Street's a giant casino, and the money that people put into these companies, if you look at where their financing actually comes from, very little of it is from equity raise. So public companies are great and they give people a place to invest. But because of the way they're owned, there's a tremendous pressure on the CEOs of these companies to look for quarter-to-quarter earnings or less.
Mm-hmm.
And the typical CEO has a tenure of less than 5 years. So there's very little incentive in these companies to think about investments for the long term, particularly investments in people. The first reaction of a troubled public company is to lay people off. I dare say the first reaction of an ESOP company is not to lay people off. The last thing you want to do, not just because you're good folks, but because you know when things get better, you're going to be in a lot better shape than your competitors if you've got a trained workforce ready to go, and the data bear you out on that. Second kind of ownership is private equity. About 20% of the workforce, it's been estimated, works for companies owned by private equity. And some private equity firms are actually embracing at least a modest form of employee ownership, so that's a step. But most private equity firms aren't. And even in the ones that are, the vast majority of the benefit goes to a tiny number of people. Private equity firms have a longer time horizon, typically 3 to 7 years, than public company CEOs, but still pretty short. And their goal is to maximize profits and flip the company, and often that means reducing labor costs and reducing people. The third form of ownership is family-owned businesses, individually owned businesses, and these have tremendous advantages for society and communities. But eventually, pretty much all those companies are going to be sold. And when they're sold, they might be sold to some big competitor, a public company perhaps, they might be sold to private equity, so they go out of that model. None of these models provide a realistic way for ordinary workers to accumulate substantial ownership. You know, they could if they could put aside enough money into their 401k plans to build really substantial assets. But the reality is, if, as we've discussed, people's wages are stagnant and their needs are growing, it's harder and harder to do that. And most people say they live paycheck to paycheck. So putting that extra money aside is really hard.
Yeah. So the only other way I've seen it is if you work for that company and they sell, and then they pay some high level people that aren't necessarily owners, you know, X
Right.
amount of the deal. But like, you're absolutely right. There's no way. And we know that, like you said, the third form, everybody eventually will sell, which is part of also the relevancy of this topic, because we're
Right.
seeing this concept of, I don't know who coined this phrase, the silver tsunami, but we're starting to see that. I know I'm seeing it, and you probably are seeing it in the you know, the bigger picture of the NCEO.
Sure.
So we know that we're at the beginning of a major transition of ownership right now, you know, in the next 5 to 10 years. It's going to be really interesting. So that really paints the picture of the ownership as we start thinking about the issue of wealth inequality, and then the way ownership is. How do we change things. So this is kind of the next part of your book. Like, how do we
Right.
actually make a difference with obviously we're getting to the ESOP being the primary solution, but so let's walk through that a little bit.
So the reason that we focus on ESOPs, and we do talk about other ideas, I'll mention some of them, but the reason we focus on ESOPs is twofold. One is they're politically practical. There's a lot of books that end with a chapter on what next after a devastating analysis of all the problems of whatever it is. And this is one of the areas, how do we deal with this tremendous economic insecurity? And they say, well, if I ran the world, it would be blah, 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 blah. And almost invariably, that's great if you do, but there ain't no chance that you're going to. So it's not there, we didn't want to have some pie in the sky notion of what can we do if we ruled the world. We wanted a notion of what realistically can be done. There's a phrase I love coming from Stephen Johnson, the science writer, and it's my favorite phrase for any kind of innovation and change, whether it's a strategic change in your company or larger social change, called the adjacent possible. The adjacent possible is that thing which is different enough to really move you forward, but not so different that it's just too long a journey and too much of a risk to try to get there. And employee ownership is a great example of an adjacent possible. It's something we already know is doing exactly what it claimed to do. Participants in ESOPs have about 3 times the retirement assets. They're laid off about 1/3 to 1/5 as much. Voluntary turnover is much lower, and the companies perform better. So we know this does what it claims to do. We also know that many more companies would be ESOPs if we really just made some tweaks in the system. So we talk about, for instance, creating state programs to encourage more employee ownership, simply through education and outreach, because most business owners don't have a clue what this is, or they're told by their advisors it's not a good idea because their advisors don't want them to sell to an ESOP because they don't know how to do it.
That's right.
Or
That's
they
right.
might make more money selling to somebody else. So getting more education out there at the local level would really help, and it wouldn't cost that much. California just passed a law to start this process, for instance, and it passed both houses unanimously. Imagine that.
Yeah.
There's a bill in Congress now, there's a very good chance of passing the Work Act, which I wrote 35 years ago for a Tennessee senator, that now actually may become law. You got to persist, I guess.
Yes.
And that would create state funding for these state programs all over the country, solving some of the finance problems. It would, a lot of sellers, and certainly you know this, Phil, a lot of sellers say, well, I really like the ESOP, but I got to do a seller note if I want to sell the whole company, at least for part of the transaction. I'd like the money now. So
Right.
finding ways to solve that funding gap with public support is eminently doable. We do it with lots of other federal and state loan guarantee programs. And there's a concept now being proposed that would expand those programs to employee ownership. So there are these kind of small tweaks that could be made, but equally important, I think, would be employee ownership's an idea that gets a lot of political pats on the head. Oh, that's nice. These are cute companies. Look what they're doing. Isn't that swell?
Right.
Let's go on to serious conversations.
Right.
Employee ownership needs to be a serious conversation that is a prominent part of political discussions. That wouldn't cost anything. It might even get you votes. Certainly wouldn't cost you any votes. So, I did a podcast last week with a right-wing conservative network, and I'm going to do a podcast later today with the American Social Business Venture Network.
Okay.
They're about as far apart as you get, but they're both really like the idea. So it's a practical step. It's not going to solve every problem, but it's a really important step. And there are other ideas like I'll just mention one. We mentioned several platform cooperatives.
Mhm.
Imagine that instead of Uber or Lyft being owned by a small number of people and started by venture capital, that software had been developed in a way that it was usable by the drivers themselves.
Mm.
And so the platform, the technology, is owned by the drivers. And there actually are some instances now of this getting underway. There are ways to make that happen with relatively small public investments. And so that's another way that you could get, for instance, gig workers to be owners.
Yeah, I would just add to the discussion on this, because I mean, I think from my perspective and what I see as part of the issue that you haven't touched on yet is I think the actual cost of ESOPs is very confusing to people. And there's a lot of, when I talk to new companies about ESOPs, there's a lot of confusion in the sense of like, who does this and who does that. And to me, the cost of the ESOP needs to, because advisors are charging just dramatically different, rates doing this. So because of that, you might talk to somebody and they say, well, it's going to cost this. And you might talk to somebody else and they're like, how can they both be right if they're so different?
Yeah.
I think part of it's the industry has not caught up, from an economic model, with I think part of the barrier to entry, maybe part of the lack of education. But like my own role is so significantly different than the way an investment banking firm would put together an ESOP deal. So I think that's going to be part of that. And I think I absolutely agree with you. I mean, all the support that a political system, which is bipartisan agreement, which ESOPs have, supporting new ESOPs is going to be important. I think the community of advisors between CPAs, attorneys, bankers, insurance people, they all have to understand better ESOPs, and that takes time.
I think you're right. If there were many more advisors in this field, the cost would come down.
Yeah.
And I also think you're right that part of the reason the costs sometimes appear to be so high or are so high is that the people doing these transactions are using the model they would use, say, well, we're going to sell you to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
The ESOP might be one. So we get a success fee, and that adds a lot of cost. And sometimes that's really justified. And other times the owner's absolutely certain they're going to sell to an ESOP.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that there's a reason for that in those transactions.
Yeah, I think it's just because they've been able to do it. I mean, when I tell people, like, what is an ESOP transaction? It is an M&A transaction, but it's a regulated M&A transaction, which is distinctly different than a regular M&A transaction, where if I'm going to bring in a buyer from wherever, and source a buyer, that's traditionally what you get paid a success fee for. But we all know we already have the buyer, which is
that's right.
Yeah,
I talked to a business broker once, and he said, so what can I charge as a success fee for telling my client they could do an ESOP? And I said, well, I don't think you can charge very much. And he said, well, I can't do this then. So yeah, it would be great for my client, but it's not good for me. So I'm not going to tell them.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that thinking, I think, that's a dead end anyways. If you're a business professional and you're doing whatever you're doing and you're not really there to help people, but you're going to get something, I think in the end, you're in a dead end,
Yeah.
At the bottom line is, if I don't always tell people the ESOP is right for them. I mean, because it could be that based on their goals and objectives, they should go a different direction. My job is to help them. And that's our job, really, to do what we're doing. If we do that well, then everybody wins in the end. But, so ESOPs, though, because, if you think about it, and this is something I think is just a clarifying point, because a lot of people on this podcast are so brand new to ESOPs. Some of the basic questions I get is like, how does the employee actually benefit? Some people think the employee is actually buying the stock, which is not true. So when we just give some foundational understanding of what an ESOP is, it's a retirement plan where the people continue to work in their jobs that they had before, And by doing that, they're going to earn shares of stock over a period of time, typically a longer period of time. So what would you add to that? I just want to make sure that the benefit of an ESOP
Yeah, I've taken many thousands of calls over the last 40 some years. And so I thought I got reasonably good at explaining how an ESOP worked. But I realized early on that I would tell people how they work. And the first thing I would say is that you have to understand the employees don't buy the shares. And I'd go through the whole explanation at the end. They'd say, Corey, that was great. I understand everything you just explained to me. When do the employees buy the shares? And, I'm sure you've had that experience too.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's just baked into people's conception. So here's a different way to think about this. And it's what Kelso's concept was. Let's imagine that a private equity firm wants to buy a company. Most of the time, what they do is they borrow money to buy the company and they pay it back out of the future earnings. Because why would you buy a company if you didn't think you could do that?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So what if the employees who know more about the company than the private equity firm and have a lot more reason to make it succeed, why can't the employees do the same thing? Well, because they don't have the collateral. And so solving that problem was simply saying, let's find a way for the employees as a group to have access to collateral so that their company can borrow money to buy the shares, and the employees in the future will, as you say, Phil, they will work for the company, earn the profits to pay off that loan. So you earn it through the work that you do. And it's a really simple concept when you boil it down to that. And so the trick was, how do you get the existing owners to be willing to put up the collateral they already own so the employees could become the owners? Of course, the answer was that great American solution to all problems: provide a tax incentive.
Mm-hmm. And it works.
And it works. And the truth is, I'm sure this is true of most and maybe all of the people listening to this, it isn't just the money and it isn't just the tax benefits. In fact, when I talk to people, the most resonant concept about employee ownership is, this is my legacy.
Mm-hmm.
I worked my whole life to build this company. These people helped me build it. I'm rooted in this community. And if I transfer this ownership to the employees and see them thrive, what a wonderful way to end my business career. What a wonderful thing to be proud of. And it is.
It really is. I totally agree with you. The tax side gets you so far, gets people interested in talking about it. I can't tell you how many ESOPs I've done where, it's not the majority, but there's several that you get surprised. Like the owner's like, look, that's enough. Like we've negotiated fair market value, and we could get more, not more than fair market value, but the number that they want is less than. And you're like, oh, I know we could get to this. And they're like, no, I don't want to strap the company, because they truly care about the sustainability of this company and the employees being able to be successful. They don't want to strap them with too much debt. And that's what's unusual. And honestly, what I love about this business is because you're dealing with people that do truly care about other people.
I heard a keynoter once. He said, how many people go through their lives answering the question, what do I want to be remembered for, as I want to be remembered as somebody who's really rich? A few people. Or I had this huge house or these fancy cars. Most people, what I want to be remembered for is something I did for my family, my community, my colleagues, for the larger society. And, I'm 73, and when I think about what I want to be remembered for, I want people to say, he made the world a better place. That would be heaven, to be able to think that's how people remember me.
I got to imagine that that's already true right now, Corey, because like just the things we talked about, the fact that you've dedicated your life to this and you saw the concept being so helpful. So I think you've already hit that goal, And the question is like, how long do you, I mean, at 73, do you want to keep doing what you're doing? You probably love it so much you don't want to stop. I'm imagining.
Ever. No.
Yeah.
As long as I can be useful to the organization and the idea, I will do it. I haven't gotten paid for this job for 11 years now, and I love it.
Yep.
To me, it's an extraordinary blessing. I wake up every day literally thinking I am so fortunate to be in this community with these people doing this kind of work. It's just extraordinary. I love it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let's talk about capitalism. That's so as you finish the book, you talk about capitalism, and we think about reinventing capitalism for the 21st century. What do you mean by that, in terms of what the future holds, assuming ESOPs are continually successful in doing more and more?
So if you can imagine an economy in which most working people, whether it's through ESOPs or worker co-ops or employee ownership trusts or private equity firms that grant them equity as part of the deal, or platform co-ops, or broader ideas like sovereign wealth funds, like the Alaska Sovereign Wealth Fund that provides everyone with a dividend based on the oil there. Maybe baby bonds. In one way or another, or maybe multiple ways, everybody has a meaningful ownership stake in the economy. That would be a really different world, where people would see the system of capitalism as a lot more fair. And I think it would increase people's buy-in to society overall. The other thing we talk a little bit about in the book is within these companies, that employees, the typical structure is employees are involved in a lot of decisions about how their work is done, because that's what makes these companies really work best. Well, when you're doing that, you're working for a common purpose, because we're all owners here. And now you're sitting across the table or around a group of chairs, talking to people from all different backgrounds, all different levels in the company often, and everybody's an owner, and everybody can have a say and is valued for their input. That creates a level of social trust that we've really lost in society, and hopefully this will help people replicate that. So I think there's a lot to be hopeful for in the way this can transform the economy and people's lives.
Yep. No, I totally agree. What I love about ESOPs too, and you've hit on this, but the people stay in their jobs. With people with turnover, what we don't think about a lot of times is somebody starts working for a company and then they jump to another company and they jump to another company. And for them, they never really experience the fruit of building a career in a company that individually can be not, just super satisfying if you're at the right place, right? Not that they shouldn't, or, there's a lot of reasons people move on to different employment, but the other side of it is the community itself. Like if these companies get bought by a private equity and then they close the shop down and they move everything to a different state, the community loses those jobs.
Right.
And a lot of times and then you think about these companies that are valuable and they're innovative, and you kind of lose all of that, because a spreadsheet with financials and different numbers and planning isn't the company. It's just a representation of what the value is at the point in time. But the real value of company is the combination of the leadership and the people that gets totally wiped out. So the customers lose that, the employees lose that, the community loses that. So that's one of the things I love about ESOPs is it retains that for everybody, right, for a long period of time, which makes our country better. It makes our communities better. It gives people better jobs than they would have otherwise,
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. So those are things I think are important. When I think about capitalism, I think it's a great opportunity. I think you nailed it at the beginning. And obviously there's a cost to every system, whether it be communism, socialism, or capitalism. There's going to be a cost to those systems. And I think we're seeing that as we kind of come back to the beginning of what we started with. So from the perspective of somebody looking at this book, what would you guide them if they're looking for a resource as far as why to pick up your book?
Well, hopefully this puts employee ownership in a broader context. It's not a how to do an ESOP book. We have lots of books on that.
Yeah,
So
we do.
They're written entirely by me often, so they're not nearly as good as this one is, because I have a great co-author to work with. But this book tries to place it in this broader context we've been talking about. And we're hoping that this is a book that people will share with their colleagues at work, because I think reading this book gives people a sense that they're part of a larger enterprise. And that's really important. So I hope people will buy this and give it. Some companies already are buying this to give out to their communications committee or give out to lots of people in the company. And I definitely hope people buy it and give it to their state legislator and to any other pundit or person you might want to try to influence. The California bill, just to give you an example, the California bill happened because one of our members called a state senator they had an acquaintance with and said, hey, this is really a good idea. Maybe it's something you should sponsor. The state senator said, I like that idea. Who should I talk to? So a group of us got together in response to that. And we had a series of meetings, crafted a bill, and it passed.
There
was no lobbying. There was no vast fundraising and whatever.
Yep.
And you can do that in your state. Go talk to a legislator about creating a state program. We can help you with that.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's just like that's how the political system should work. You know, people should want to get involved, and whatever ideas that they might have, be able to do that. But to have a success story like that is exciting to be able to do that.
And that's how 1042 happened. The owner of a local company said, look, I can sell to John Deere for their stock and not pay any tax till I sell John Deere stock. I don't care. I'd rather sell to the ESOP and pay more taxes because it's important to me. But the next guy who does this shouldn't have to do this. And I said, Ed, that's a really good idea. We should do that. And that was the lobbying effort behind 1042. So we tend to think of politics as this almost impenetrable fortress, unless you've got lots of money and lots of political clout. And that's true for some issues, of course, but it isn't true for this one, fortunately.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Well, let me just say this about the book is called Ownership, Reinventing Companies, Capitalism, and Who Owns What by Corey Rosen and John Case. I will put a link to that book on my website at journeytoanesop.com. You can go into the NCEO website as well, and you're going to find that. So we wanted to definitely get that resource out to you to know about it. And I think that's really important. I got this quote I wanted to finish with. The book to read is not the one that thinks for you, but the one which makes you think, by Harper Lee. So I just thought that was an appropriate quote for us today. Check out the NCEO as well. And just because we want to help you guys do ESOPs, more ESOPs. So appreciate you today, Corey, and everything you brought to the podcast.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, Phil. It was fun.
Great. So with all that, we will see you guys on our next step on this journey to an ESOP.